There is a rule in archival work that sounds simple until you've spent enough time in the field to understand what it actually means. The rule is this: the document does not lie. Whatever is written in the record is what was written. Your job is not to interpret it, not to question it, not to decide whether it makes sense. Your job is to preserve it exactly as it exists and pass it forward. The document does not lie. It only tells you what it knows. I believed that for 11 years. I built my entire professional identity around it. And then I found a diary and a collection of 19th-century journals at the Aldern University archive. And I read a description of myself making coffee in my kitchen at 6:43 in the morning on a Wednesday in October. And I have not been able to hold on to that rule since. Because the document does not lie. And what that document told me is something that I am still trying to understand, that my name is not important. What is important is the job. I am an archival specialist. Specifically, I handle digitization projects for historical document collections. Universities, private estates, municipal archives, historical societies. My work is to take physical documents, letters, diaries, ledgers, maps, legal records, and produce high-resolution digital scans that can be preserved, cataloged, and made accessible without further handling of the originals. It is precise work. It is slow work. It is, most of the time, quietly satisfying in the way that all preservation work is satisfying. You are holding something back from time, at least for a while. You are making sure it doesn't disappear. I had been contracted by Aldern University to digitize a collection of 19th-century personal papers that had been donated by the estate of a local family. The collection was substantial, roughly 14 boxes of material spanning from about 1840 to 1910, correspondence, household accounts, legal documents, and a significant number of personal journals kept by various members of the family across 3 generations. The university's Special Collections Department had held the donation for several years without the resources to process it properly, and my contract was to produce a complete digital archive with full metadata tagging so the collection could eventually be made available to researchers. If you're new to Eerie Atmos X, welcome. What we do here is simple. We take the accounts that don't make it into the official record, the things that happen to ordinary people doing ordinary work in ordinary places, and we give them the space they deserve. Subscribe before we go any further, because this one builds slowly, and I don't want you to miss the point where it turns. It turns hard, and when it does, I want you to be here for it. The Aldern Archive is housed in the basement level of the university's oldest academic building, a Victorian-era structure called Pemberton Hall. The Special Collections Room is at the end of a corridor that smells permanently of old paper and the particular chemical tang of document preservation materials. The lighting down there is fluorescent and slightly inadequate, the kind of lighting that makes everything look slightly washed out, slightly less real than it should be. There are no windows. The temperature is kept at a constant 65 degrees Fahrenheit for conservation purposes, which means that even in October, when the world outside is warm enough for a light jacket, the archive is cold enough that I kept a cardigan on the back of my chair. I had been working the Aldern contract for about 6 weeks when I reached box 9. The boxes were numbered in the order. They had been packed by the estate, which was not necessarily chronological order, and box 9 turned out to contain a mixed grouping, some household correspondence from the 1870s, a set of legal documents related to a property transaction, and at the bottom of the box, wrapped in acid-free tissue paper that had been placed there by whoever packed the donation, A diary. The diary was small, roughly 5 inches by 3, bound in dark brown leather that had dried and cracked along the spine. There was no name on the cover. The pages were handwritten in a small, precise script using what appeared to be iron gall ink, which was standard for the period. The condition was good, better than many documents of that age. The writing was legible. The paper had not significantly deteriorated. It was, from a preservation standpoint, a straightforward item to possess. I logged it into the collection manifest, photographed the cover and spine, and opened it to the first page to identify the date, range, and author for the metadata record. The first entry was dated October 1881. No author name. Many personal diaries of that era do not include the author's name, since they were private documents not intended for any audience. The handwriting was consistent throughout, suggesting a single author. The entries were regular, almost daily, occasionally skipping a few days, but maintaining a consistent rhythm across what appeared to be roughly 8 months of material. I did what I always do with a new diary. I read the first entry, skimmed a few entries from the middle to get a sense of the voice and content, and read the last entry to understand the scope of the document before beginning the full scan. This is standard cataloging practice. You need enough context to write accurate metadata. The first entry described a morning routine: coffee, a walk to a post office, some work at a writing desk. Unremarkable domestic detail, the kind that fills most personal diaries of that era. Nothing that flagged my attention. I skimmed to the middle. More domestic detail. Some observations about the weather. A reference to a neighbor. An account of a social call. Period appropriate, nothing unusual. I turned to the last section of the diary, planning to read the final few entries to understand how the document ended. And that is where I stopped, because the entry I was reading, the entry I had turned to almost at random, somewhere in the final third of the diary, was dated. And the date it was dated was the previous day, October 14th. I looked at that date for what felt like a long time. My first thought was that I had misread it. The handwriting was small, and the numerals of the period have certain quirks. The 4 that looks like a 9, the 1 that looks like a 7. I looked at it again. October 14th. The year below it was 1881, consistent with the rest of the document. But the date was yesterday. I told myself it was coincidence. The same calendar date, 140 years apart. One kept reading. The entry began with a description of a morning. Waking early before the alarm. Making coffee. The author used the word brew, which is the period appropriate term, but the description that followed was specific in a way that made the hair on my arms stand up before I had fully processed why. The description mentioned the sound of rain against a window. It mentioned the particular quality of the light, gray, diffuse, the kind that comes through cloud cover. It mentioned a moment of standing at the window with a cup in hand, looking out at a wet street, before sitting down to begin the day's work. I had done exactly that. The previous morning, October 14th, I had woken before my alarm. I had made coffee. It had been raining. I had stood at my kitchen window, looking out at the street. I had done it at 6:43 in the morning because I had looked at my phone when the rain woke me, and I remember the time specifically. The entry mentioned the time. 6:43. I put the diary down on the scanning table. I sat back in my chair. The archive was quiet around me. The hum of the climate control, the faint sound of the ventilation system, nothing else. I was alone in the special collections room. The corridor outside was empty. The fluorescent light was doing its washed-out thing on the white walls. I picked the diary up again. I kept reading. The entry described a commute. Specific details: a left turn at an intersection, a particular building observed from a vehicle window, the color of a traffic light. All of these details translated from the language of 1881 into something modern, mapped precisely onto my drive to the university that morning. The intersection. The building, which I recognized as a structure that would have been new in 1881, which still stands on that corner. The light, which had been red when I reached it and had made me stop long enough to notice. The leaves on the tree beside it. The entry then described arrival at a place of work. A basement room. A long table with equipment on it. Cold temperature. Fluorescent lighting. The author did not use those words. Used instead the cold, white light of the gas lamps, which was wrong for the technology of 1881, but correct in its description of the quality of the light I was sitting under right now. And then the entry described opening a box, taking out documents one by one, and at the bottom of the box, a diary, small, brown leather. Cracked spine. I stopped reading. I sat in the cold room under the fluorescent light, and I did not move for what was probably 2 minutes. My coffee was on the table beside me, in the travel mug I bring every day. I had made it that morning at 6:43, standing at my kitchen window in the rain. The archive was quiet. The diary was in my hands. I turned to the next entry. It was dated October 15th. Today, the entry for today described waking. It described the commute. It described arriving at the archive and sitting down at the scanning table and opening box 9 and finding the diary. It described reading the entry for October 14th and stopping. It described sitting in the cold room for 2 minutes without moving, and then it described what I was going to do next. I want to be careful here, because I know how this sounds, and I have sat with it long enough to know that there is no way to tell it. That doesn't sound like exactly what you're thinking it sounds like. But I have to tell you what was in that entry, because it is the part that I cannot put down. The entry for October 15th described, in the same small, precise handwriting, the same iron gall ink, the same voice that had been running through the diary since October 1881. It described me picking up my phone. I picked up my phone. I don't know why. I think I was going to call someone. I don't know who. I just needed to hear a voice that wasn't in my head. The entry said she picked up her phone. She did not dial. She held it in her hand. I held it in my hand. I did not dial. The entry said she put the phone down. She looked at the window, but there is no window in this room. She looked at the wall where a window should be. I put the phone down. I looked at the east wall of the archive, which is a blank wall, no window, just the pale plaster under the fluorescent light. I looked at it the way you look at a thing when your brain is telling you there should be something there. That isn't. I closed the diary. I placed it on the table. I stood up, put on my coat, and left the archive. I did not log out properly. I did not complete my end-of-day documentation. I left the building and sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes before I felt able to drive. When I got home, I called a colleague, someone I have known for a long time. Another archivist, someone whose judgment I trust. I told her what had happened. She was quiet for a moment, and then she asked me if I had photographed the entries. I had not. I had not thought to photograph them. I had left so fast that I had not thought to do the one thing that my entire professional training would normally make automatic. I went back the next morning. The diary was on the table where I had left it. I opened it to the entry for October 14th. I read it again. It was exactly as I remembered: the rain, the coffee, the time, the commute, the archive, the box, the diary. I turned to the entry for October 15th. It was there. It described everything I had done: the phone, the wall, leaving without logging out, and then there was an entry for October 16th, which was today. I photographed every page. I sent the photographs to my colleague. She called me back an hour later, and she said, and I am quoting her directly, "The paper is period consistent. The ink is period consistent. The handwriting is consistent throughout the document. There is no physical evidence of interpolation or addition." She said it as carefully as she could. She said it the way you say something when you know the words are not going to be enough. I have spent the weeks since trying to find an explanation. I have had the physical document examined by 2 independent conservators. Both confirmed that the diary is period authentic. The paper, the ink, the binding, the aging patterns are all consistent with a document produced in the 1870s or 1880s. There is no evidence of modern addition. There is no evidence that the pages for October 14th, 15th, and 16th were added after the fact. The document appears in every physical respect to be exactly what it presents itself as: a diary written in 1881. I have pulled every record I can find about the family who donated the collection. I have read every piece of correspondence in all 14 boxes. I have found no reference to this diary, no reference to its author, no reference to anything in its contents that connects it to any identifiable member of the family. It came from the bottom of box 9, wrapped in acid-free tissue, and before that it came from whatever room in whatever house the family's estate had been cleared from, and before that it had been sitting somewhere for 140 years. There are entries for every day, from October 1881 through June 1882, in the front of the diary. The entries for those months are exactly what you would expect from a private diary of that period: domestic routines, weather observations, social calls, small daily events, ordinary, unremarkable. The handwriting of someone who wrote regularly and thought carefully and paid attention to the details of daily life. And then, after a gap of blank pages, 3 blank pages in the middle of the diary, which is unusual but not unheard of, the entries resume, with October 14th of this year, written in the same hand, in the same ink, on pages that have been sitting undisturbed for 140 years. I have read ahead. I have read every entry from October 14th forward to the end of the diary. There are 91 more entries after the day I found it. Each one is dated. Each one describes a day. The entries for dates that have already passed match my memory of those days with an accuracy that I cannot account for. The entries for dates that have not yet arrived describe days that I have not yet lived. I have made a decision that I want to be honest with you about. I have not read the final entry. The diary ends on a specific date, 6 weeks from now, with an entry that I have not read. I have looked at the page. I have seen that there is writing on it. I have not read it. I don't know if I'm going to read it. I don't know what it would mean to read it. I don't know what it would mean if what it describes matches what happens, or what it would mean if it doesn't. I don't know which outcome I'm more afraid of. What I know is this: the document does not lie. It only tells you what it knows. I have spent 11 years believing that was a comfort, a foundation, the thing that made my work meaningful, the idea that you could trust what was written, that the record was reliable, that the past was fixed and knowable and could be held. I don't know what the past is anymore. I don't know what it means for something to be written. I don't know who wrote those entries or how or why. And I don't know what it means that they describe my life with a precision that I cannot explain by any means available to me. The diary is in the university archive, cataloged as part of the collection, wrapped in fresh acid-free tissue in its archival box. It is preserved. That is my job. Whatever it is, wherever it came from, whatever it knows, it is preserved. It will outlast me. It will be there for the next person who opens box 9. I don't know what they'll find when they read it. If any of you have worked in archives, in libraries, and document preservation, if you have handled old material and found something that shouldn't be there, something that looked back at you from the page, I want you to share it in the comments. Because I have been carrying this alone for 6 weeks, and I am becoming more convinced that I am not the first person this has happened to. I am becoming more convinced that somewhere in the collections of the world's archives, in the basements and climate-controlled rooms and acid-free boxes, there are other documents like this one, waiting, wrapped in tissue, at the bottom of a box. Share this video if it reached you. Not for the numbers, because this is the kind of account that should find the people it needs to find. Someone watching this right now has a story like mine. Someone watching this right now knows exactly what I mean when I say the document does not lie. Pass it on. I still go to the archive every day. I still do my work. I still scan and catalog and tag and preserve. The diary sits in its box in the special collections room, and I do not open it. I log in every morning, and I log out every evening, and I do not open it. But I think about the last entry. I think about it every day. I think about what it says. I think about whether, if I read it, the thing it describes would still happen. I think about whether not reading it changes anything at all. The document does not lie. It only tells you what it knows. I'm starting to think it knows everything.